and welcome back to Ashley Main Makes. So today I am making a vintage inspired apron out of a vintage tablecloth. So now that it's finally cooling down here and I'm doing a little bit more cooking with the oven on, I thought I would go ahead and make myself a new apron. Now, I have made several aprons in the past and I'm hoping I'm learning along the way. My mom gave me this tablecloth last Christmas. It was originally my Nana's from when she had first gotten married. The main issue is it is very old. It does have a lot of holes, does have a lot of stains. So the thought was that I would cut it up and repurpose it and make it into something new. And that time had finally come. I had a piece of linen hanging around that wasn't quite the color that I thought it was going to be originally, but I also realized that it perfectly matches my Pyrex. So this became the basis of this apron. I was inspired by a lot of these vintage aprons. I'll pop up a bunch of photos here with these big packed pockets on them, and I thought this would be a great way for me to repurpose my tablecloth and bring a little bit of this into my kitchen. The pattern for this that I'm using is actually from Gertie. It is from the Charm Patterns Patreon page. For those of you that haven't heard, Patreon is a page where you can support like artists and creators. I know a lot of people here on YouTube have a Patreon as a way of supporting the work that they do, but this is one that Gertie has with Charm Patterns, and I do really like it. It is kind of fun to get a new pattern every month that comes in my size, which is great. Her new size block goes up to a 62-inch bust and, more important for me, a 56-inch waist. We'll generally say that the stuff in her new block is a lot better. The old block is a little suspect, and I think they knew that. So yeah, I've been really happy with the new block, and so, you know, I thought I'd give it a try. I really love the design of this. It has actual like bust darts and bust shaping in it, which is one of the issues that I had with my old aprons, is that they would gape open and then you'd like spill stuff or drop stuff down the front of the apron, and that kind of defeats the purpose of the apron. Also, it fits well. I'd love to make the pinafore version, so there's that. So this was kind of a pre-test for that. A couple of things I'll be showing in this video is obviously making those vintage style patch pockets. I'm going to be reinforcing them a little bit and going through the whole thing. And I will also be showing you a couple of flat felled seams that I did to just finish this off in a very heirloom type of way. So let's get into it. So starting out here, I wasn't going to do a mock-up, but the world had other plans. I went and looked at a bunch of people on the Facebook group, and I noticed a lot of people had trouble with this gaping at the front here, so I thought I would do a mock-up just to see. I know that's excessive for an apron, but my main goal of this apron is not to have that gap at the front because I keep spilling stuff down it, so yeah. Also, I think I might want to make like the pinafore version of this if I like this, so that was kind of the other thought. So we're gonna do a proper fitting on this, even though we're making an apron, and some of you will say I'm a crazy person. So, yeah, so starting out, so I did go through, because this gets really confusing just with all the lines in here. I did go through and mark it up with my pen just so I can see which size I am in this mass of lines. Originally I was gonna like fold this and like not cut the start out, but this bodice is lined, so that's going to be fine even in my linen. So I'm probably going to go ahead and just cut this out. And so far I haven't done anything special. I am just cutting out the size that I would be based on the size chart and my bust measurement versus my high bust measurement. You can kind of see that in the instructions for the pattern and a lot of Gertie's patterns. So the nice part about this is it is already an FG cup, so hopefully this will save me a lot of trouble in doing a full bust adjustment and all that. My hope that this would be an easy project after the last one give me a bit of a palette cleanser, so we'll see how true that actually is. So to mock it up, I have the bodice front here, and then I have the shoulder straps. This will also be good because it'll give me an idea of how long these actually need to be on me. And then I have the bodice back piece. So again, probably don't need the whole thing of this, but it'll be good to just test and see how we want to be. Of course, I'm making yet another wrap thing. I think I'm also done with wrap things. after this, I'm just sort of done. But anyway, so we're gonna go ahead. I'm actually using, this was the old mock-up. This looks very familiar. This is the old mock-up from doing the walkaway dress. So this is actually this back pattern piece. So that's kind of good. So I can reuse some of this fabric. So that's one thing too that's great about doing mock-ups is, you know, you can kind of reuse bits and chunks of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this out, and then I will be back with the mock-up try-on. So we're in the mock-up bathroom again, and honestly this isn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be, but that being said, I am once again proving correct that I am really happy that I did a mock-up. It's really not as bad as I thought it was going to be. That being said, there's just like one major issue. You can see here, don't mind my not the greatestly sewn dart leg, that this is about where my apex is, so that's cool. But I'm getting a lot of like wrinkling and pooling in here, and you can kind of see how long this is on me. So like I'm really short-waisted, so my hips are actually like right here. And I thought I would wear, this is the other rose claire dress that I made. I'll link me making the first one somewhere. This dress has like my favorite waistline. So what I thought I would do is show you just like how long this is versus like the rose claire waistline is way up here. And because of that, like when I'm bending and stuff, this is wanting to like wrinkle up to my smallest point, which is a lot higher than this pattern. So all I'm gonna have to do is shorten the torso here. So we're just going to, oh, and by the way, I did cut this off. So this already has been cut off like 5/8 for the seam allowance. If I could get it to pinch out, you know, something like that. So it would be literally this amount here in the front. I think this will be really good too if I decide to down the road make the pinafore version. But as you can see, that pretty much fixes the issue. So now this lays nice and smooth. I can like bend around. I'll probably do the same to the back. Like you can see the back is like dipping down. Yes, I sewed the strap to the wrong strap. Don't worry about that. But this is also dipping down. So I'll probably move that up to align with the side as well. So yeah, so this will take it up to my proper waist point. Mark this guy, top and bottom, where this meets here. I'm doing it at the dart point because that's probably where it will be best to give me a guideline. Yeah, really not a big deal. I am probably just going to move on. I didn't actually have any gapping here. My best guess is probably that this got stretched out for people. So, or your cup size is incorrect. So that would be the two fixes for that. But I think I did pick the best cup size for me. And honestly, I'm happy to move forward on this. I think this is fine. We're gonna go from there. All right, so I'm just gonna show you how to do this lengthen and shorten adjustment on paper. Since again, I've gotten this question a lot. So, oh, I also got this out just to show you too, since this was the dress that I was wearing. So this is that rose claire dress that I did. And so you can see here, if I line up, say the end of the dart here, which actually mine even needs to come up a bit more, which actually that looks about right, you know, compared to my mock-up. So say you look at that versus the bottom of where this rose claire dress is, that makes total sense, right? That looks pretty much bang on to what we were talking about. So this is a good trick too. If you're looking at a new pattern versus an old pattern, you're like, geez, this looks like a lot. You can compare it to one you like and just go, yep, sandy check, makes sense, looks like the other pattern that I like. So what we don't want to do is just lop off that extra length off the bottom. What that's going to do is mess up your waist measurements so that your skirt and your bodice won't line up. So what I'm actually going to do is look for a point that's about halfway down my dart. So I'm just gonna line up with this bottom line here. Yeah, let's call it that. This one's a bit more tricky because we have this split dart here. So I'm gonna mark up, this was pretty significant for me actually. This was like a whole 2 inches, which doesn't happen very often. Yeah, something like that. So you still have the step there, that's fine. The other thing I'm gonna check here is that extra dart length I was looking at. So I unpicked just this one dart here. Now this guy is basically another inch up, something like that. I'm going to just cut this off. Something like that. Not too concerned about my dart at this point. Going to tape it back together along that seam line here that I made so that we don't have a seam line like we did on the mock-up. I'll have just one complete pattern piece if I can get this straight. And we're gonna do the same thing on this side. Cut this. And I'm just leaving this bit of tab here just to have something to tape onto. All right, something like that. You can see that now this dart is very janky. There's like our dart here that I marked, and then there's the original leg, and then the original insides here. I've lost that original inside dart as well, but we'll fix that here in a minute. So all I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna connect my new dart point that I lengthened to with the old end point. So you can see the old end point here, new dart point. So I'm just gonna draw a new line, basically ignoring the old one, like so. This is a little messed up on the inside now. Originally this would have been a 5/8 seam allowance along here. So I think what I'm actually gonna do, just because this is really friggin' confusing at this point, is I am going to just cut my dart out. Could of course be really good and trace this, but since I'm only really doing one modification here, I thought I would just be lazy. But again, proper method probably is to trace this, but you know, how proper are we? This is just for me. So this is very important to keep your seam allowance on here because this will be how you'll attach this dart back together again. And we're just clipping a little bit out for bulk. You could of course just leave this all as one dart. Probably if I'd made this pattern, that's probably what I would have done, but there is that little bit of a jag at the bottom. So, and we're doing it as a lined one. So in this case, you know, whatever, we'll do it properly. So that's my 5/8 there. So I'm just gonna cut that out. This is your shortened bodice. It's a really simple adjustment. It's really easy. Lengthen it, shorten it, do whatever you want to it. The main thing, like I say, is to leave this bottom part so that your dart remains the same width at the bottom. So you're not messing with that. So the only other weird quirk of this pattern is that this back piece connects up with the side here. The way I'm gonna need to adjust this, I'm just gonna take not as steep of an angle here because I want to leave as much coverage on this back piece as I can. So I'm just gonna measure. You could of course fold your dart up too. That's another way of doing this. So we're at like 4 inches and 4 1/4. So 8 1/4 total. I'm gonna go 8 1/4 on here. So that leaves me right here. So all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna even this off. Something like that. So we're just reducing the height of the back here without really messing it up too much because I want my waist ties and everything else to be the same. There's our adjusted back piece. So all in all, pretty easy adjustments today, especially if you're short-waisted like I am, or say you have a long torso, you might need the opposite adjustment. So yeah, really useful, really simple, makes a big difference again, and obviously not nearly the workout that last walkaway dress was. So in trying to figure out my pockets here, I have the tablecloth pulled out and this is the good side. So this side is pretty much totally intact, this corner. The other ones are basically all have issues because this one's got the stain here and holes there. That one's got like the gigantic hole. I'm gonna be using these two corners. This one is the one that does have some restriction because of these holes here. What I'm gonna do is start with this one as the basis of me patterning this pocket that I want. I think what I want to do is basically go to this edge. Looks like I can go like 12-inch square, which would be nice. That would bring us out, yeah, that would give us still this big flower up here, which would be nice. So that would be a nice, like, kind of gigantic pocket. And I think that's about kind of what we were looking at in some of the illustrations. All right, so just as I'm drawing it out here, I think what I'm gonna do is do 13 1/4. So we're sticking with our 5/8 seam allowance. So 12 inches plus 5/8 on each side. 13 1/4. Now I might cut these seam allowances down later, but I think for my sanity's sake, just as I'm sewing, because the seam allowances are 5/8 everywhere else, I'm gonna stick with that. It's good to keep them consistent so you don't muck yourself up. And I'm gonna mark this. Good notes for yourself. All right, so I think I'm happy with that. Now, normally I would probably rip linen if I was trying to make a perfect square like this. Because this is so old, I don't really want to put any more strain on this than I have to. All right, so what I'm gonna do here is my little trick. Because this one was this way, I'm just gonna flip this and match this pattern, which actually doesn't work. So it looks like they printed one and then rotated and printed the other one. So what I'm gonna do is just match this up as best as you can. It doesn't have to be like perfect, but you want it pretty close. So that, you know, and it might have warped over time, so we're just doing our best here. So that when I go cut it out, we're gonna get two matching pockets so that they can look opposite when we go to put them on the apron. You know, and it's hard to say if it was printed even. I'm like, my guess is this was probably hand printed. Yeah, I think that's about right. Something like that. So that's gonna look like that. So they're not actually as opposing as I thought they would be, because they're not when they were printed, but I actually think that looks really cute. So I'm gonna have like this one on this side and this one on the other. So you have kind of these corners. Linen is really floppy and I'm concerned about the weight of that one. I'm gonna back those with some lightweight fusible interfacing. This is lightweight woven interfacing that's made out of cotton. So it has been washed and dried. That's why it's a little crinkly, wrinkly, but it is my preferred interfacing, so I carry a lot of it on hand. And then I'm gonna mark it at 12 inches. And all I'm gonna do is just rip it, because that will give me a very straight piece. So this way I'm gonna get a perfect square, and that'll give me a nice guideline for where my stitch line should go as well on that wibbly linen. So we're sort of jumping around a little bit here, but I did find a bit of an error in the pattern, and I thought I would just point it out for those of you that don't know. So this piece here has a grain line, which is that arrow going up and down, which would imply that this piece goes up and down this way. Now, I do have this folded back to the length that I want it at, which is sort of a nebulous line between the two views. But as you can see, even at that, this pattern would stick off on both sides. So that means it's technically wouldn't fit this way that the grain line implies. I did check the pattern instructions and the layout, even though that's something I normally don't follow. And it does show having the pieces on the cross grain like this, which is fine, and that'll work out just fine and still keep it on grain, but the grain line should be the other way, basically, is what that means, based on the layout that she was showing in the instructions. So just a heads up. Anyway, so you lay it on the cross grain. I'm fine with that. It's not a huge issue because it's a circle skirt anyway, and we're gonna have bias in this anyway, but just so you know, heads up, cut it on the cross grain. All right, and we are back. So I've done a little bit of work off camera here. I got the rest of the pattern pieces cut out, and I just did all the preliminary interfacing. So I ironed it all on. This is that patch pocket we were working on, and this is that square of interfacing that I ripped. So I've just fused it onto here using a really hot iron, and I've actually let it just sit and hang out on the ironing board for a bit just to make sure it was fused really well. But the nice part about this is because this was ripped, this is a perfect square, so this will give us a great guideline for the stitching line of our pieces together. As you can see, that's kind of important because this old linen is really wibbly and it was really hard to cut. So you can see it's not perfectly square. So this worked out well and will add to the strength of this old linen. So that's great. And then I have a piece of new linen for the lining here. So I'm going to lay this front side down on here. And the nice thing about like linen and natural fibers in general is that they sort of stick to themselves. So you don't have to use a ton of pins if you don't want. I'm just going to go ahead and pin most of the way around here. You want to leave your corners free because that's where you pivot. And I'll show you when I go to do that. This is the bottom of my pocket here. And this is generally where I like to leave the opening to flip my patch pocket right side out. And what I like to do is, I've got just like a regular pin here. That one's really bent. But I'll use two kind of random pins that I have kicking around. Maybe something that's a different color. So it kind of triggers my brain to leave a gap. So all I'm going to do is pin this like this. Giving myself like a good couple inches or so. Maybe even a little bit more, just to be able to turn this piece right side out. And I'm out of yellow pins, but that'll give me a good guideline of where to stop and where to start so that I don't like totally seal up my pocket. I'm just starting at the bottom where I have these, my two weird pins. All I'm gonna do is a little bit different than normal. I'm gonna follow right along this inner facing edge here. Make sure I back tack, because that'll prevent it from coming out as I'm manhandling it. I'm just gonna creep up to my corner here, and then with my needle down, I'm gonna lift and spin, and then put my foot back down, very important, and then just keep rolling. One of the reasons I like stopping in the middle is because this way I get really nice sharp corners. All right, so you can sort of see there, just my stitching line right up against that interfacing. And so that makes sure I have as close to a perfect square as I can manage. I do have quite a bit of excess here on the edge because I left that 5/8 seam allowance on. So all I'm gonna do, trim this down a little bit. I'm not gonna trim it down a lot just because this is old fabric and I don't want to get very close to my seam line. This will just help clean it up a little bit. So the final thing I'm gonna do before I turn this right side out is I'm actually going to take my corner here and I'm gonna trim it off basically parallel so we don't have a lot of extra bulk in the corner. And then just to be extra careful, because this linen is so loosely woven, I'm going to use some of this stuff called fray check. This is super useful if you're doing like buttonholes or, you know, you happen to snip into a seam allowance or something like that. This will just keep it from fraying out. So all I'm going to do is put some just along this edge here. And what this will do for me is just kind of block that corner so that when I go to turn this corner out, I'm not going to poke through this corner. So it's just an extra little step that I like to do, especially when I'm doing like loosely woven projects like this. Again, not necessary. You can just be a lot more careful than me. So I'm going to do the same thing on all of my corners. And I'm going to go ahead and let this dry before I turn them right side out. So probably by the time I get through both my pockets here and everything, these will be ready to be turned out. All right, so here's our pocket all dry. And I've got my slit here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start turning this inside out. That's why it's important to leave enough of a slit to get this all through. Using my point turner here, and I've got a wood one. I'm just gonna work out these corners. So it's important to spend a bit of time doing this because however this looks, of course I'm gonna give this a good iron in a minute, but kind of however these corners are is how it's gonna get sewn onto the garment. So it's important to just give this a little bit of zhuzh. You want to make sure as you're doing this that you're not having any puckery edges like this that you iron in, because that means you'll lose a bunch of your edge there. This is a very important ironing stage here. I've got a couple of them today. So all I'm going to do to start with is to address where the slit is. So I want to make sure that that slit looks like the rest of this finished edge here, because all I'm going to do is top stitch this later. So what I'm going to do is just lightly fold the edge in to match and iron that first so that you can't really tell where the slit is at all. And then when I go to do the rest of this, I'm going to want to kind of finger press it so that this top layer ends up slightly rolling ahead of the under layer so that we're not seeing that pocket lining. Now this one, it's not going to be a big deal. The front and the back pretty much look the same, but if you were doing, say, a lighter contrasting lining. So one of the things the instructions doesn't say, that's just my personal opinion, is that you should always stay stitch the top of your circle skirt panels. So all of this is going to be on a curve. A lot of it is going to be on the bias. There's a lot of pushing and pulling even when you're just doing some seams, attaching it to the bodice. So I really don't want this to stretch out. Stay stitching prevents it from stretching out, but it's not like integral to the garment. So I'm gonna put my stitch on a long stitch length. I'm not gonna go quite at 5/8 so that I make sure this is hidden in the seam allowance, and go all the way around all the waistbands of all my skirt pieces. All right, so I'm going to be doing those flat felled seams here finally, and the reason I'm doing this is because in the pattern it just has you sew them together and press them out. It mentions that you can serge some seams and do it that way. I think for me, since this garment is already like 90% lined and it's really just these two seams, that it seems a shame just to finish them on the serger. Also, I'm just kind of trying to keep the sort of vintage feel of this garment. The other reason is because flat felled seams are super strong, so this will give a lot of strength to the garment, since I do plan on like wearing this and actually using it for cooking and stuff. So just the way we start off with this is I have my fabric here, right side to right side. I'm just going to be sewing that regularly at 5/8 here. Get my damn foot down. So flat felled seams basically boil down to another you must make sure you iron this properly project. There's been a lot of ironing in this project, but anyway. So first things first, I'm just going to press my seam open. Then all I'm going to do is trim one side down, and I want to trim this down to about half of my total seam allowance. Doesn't have to be perfect, just do the best you can. Like that's good enough. Then all you're gonna do is wrap this longer side over the short side. So, and you wanna make sure, I just did this to myself, but you wanna make sure you've got your steam settings turned down a bit. You gotta get your fingers fairly close, so just watch your steam, don't give yourself a steam burn. Ask me how I know. And you're just gonna press this down as you roll it around. So I'm just gonna coax it around. But the nice thing is you're just ironing it. So if you're not happy with it, you can just iron it flat and redo it until you're happy. To sew this down, all I'm gonna do is line up my needle. So I'm gonna work on the ties now, and I just thought I'd show you this trick. I actually showed this off in my history bounding skirt video, but all I'm gonna do is take basically the largest safety pin I could find, and I'm actually just going to pin it to the inside of my waist tie here. And I'm gonna close that over top, sew this in at 5/8. And then again, we're gonna lift and spin, and I'm gonna roll. This is my favorite part, is sewing the ties. I just love sewing a skinny, long, straight seam. So next part, less fun. So I've got that safety pin on the inside. Trim off my corners here. And again, you could do that fray check trick to this corner. And then all I'm gonna do is use that big safety pin, push this down the tie. It's a little bit hard to get it going, but once you get it going, and of course this is just my method. I know a lot of people do it differently, like they'll do it with a chopstick or something. I think this is the easiest way, especially on like something that's loosely woven like a linen. Just allows me to turn the tube a little bit easier, because turning tubes is the sucky part. Sewing them is the fun part. So that took me an inordinate amount of time to iron all these straps flat, but now I have them. They're nice and crispy, and I'm just going to do a little bit of top stitching just because they did turn into a ball, and so I know when I throw this in the wash they would revert back to a ball, so this will keep them nice and flat. So I've been stalling a bit on this step of how I want these pockets to be, but I think that's about right. I kind of want them parallel to the top waistband. Obviously, they're not exactly perfect squares like I was hoping, but close enough, and we're gonna roll with it. So I have my machine loaded up with white again, and I'm just gonna do a line of top stitching all along just the top of the pocket. So I'm gonna go ahead and attach the pockets to the skirt here, and you can see why I put on this line of top stitching on the top, because then we're gonna have some stitching all along these other three sides. I have my machine set back to white here, and we're just gonna go for it. I'm going for about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm just trying to make sure I keep it super flat. Alright, so I've just been tootling along, sewing this thing up per the instructions. Yeah, so I got to where this is attached together, and you can see this is like kind of where that front dart is. So this is that left side. So I forgot to leave that open, of course, like she said you probably would, to slip the tie through. But one of the things that I didn't think about or didn't like know about was that this seam allowance is of course sticking over where you need that hole for the tie to go through on both the outside and the lining. So yes, this is not really something that they mention. I think what I'm gonna have to do is snip this away here very carefully, but like you don't want to go up to the stitching line. So for me, I think like I probably would almost leave it to this point so that you know where your stitch line's gonna be. I'm just gonna cut like a bit of a V, especially because I've got that something like that, so that when I fold it up there's a gap there for where that slit needs to be. The other thing too that I thought I would mention was this end point here. All they expect you to do here is to fold this back. So again, I would have had to serge it or something like that. But that'll leave a raw edge there, of course. So what I might do is actually unpick this, the 5/8, and just do a small hem here, do like a little baby hem. So I got that all sewn on. I just thought I'd switch gears to hemming this thing before I switch my threads to top stitching, and I'm actually going to be using some of that hem facing that I made here before. I showed making this in my Son de Fleur circle skirt video, and so I have a whole bunch of it, and I thought it'd be really nice because it's also this white linen to use that. But yeah, go watch that video if you'd like to see me making this, but I think it'll be a really nice finish and kind of weigh down the skirt a little bit. And I sewed that entire thing, and look where my bobbin ran out. Oh my god. Alright, so we're back, and I got the hem all understitched and ironed back in place, and I also just ironed the top part here. I didn't understitch it. I think what I'm actually going to do is top stitch this whole thing, just because I've already done the straps and everywhere else, and I think that'll be kind of nice, you know, give it that aprony workwear vibes. So yeah, so I've got this set up so that I have my white on the top and my brown on the bottom still. So I'm gonna start with the hem here, if I can find it. In this giant mass. Just gonna top stitch again at like 1/8 of an inch here. Just top stitching it because I've top stitched everywhere else. So yeah, so you can kind of see here it's white on this side, brown on this side, so you really can't see anything. There's only actually a couple things left here. One is just to finish off this seam along the edge now that my hem is in. This means that all my seams on this entire thing are enclosed, which is super great. So after this, I just have to probably get my fiance to help me pin the back straps in place, and then it's done. So in conclusion, I am super happy with this apron. It hits all the goals that I set out to do. It doesn't gape at all. It stays really smooth and really flat, and it goes with my kitchen perfectly. I think it is super adorable. The only downside being that it is sort of a pain to get into with the wrapping and the crisscross straps. It is quite a bit, but once you've got it on, it is very secure, and I could see running around all day in it, which definitely does lend credence towards it being great as a pinafore. So I definitely think I want to make that. I was super happy with the pattern in general. Those bust cups are fantastic. Basically I had to make no adjustments other than that lengthen shorten one that I showed you. So that is super exciting. And overall, I'm really happy with my finishing on this too. A lot of the finishes I did are going to make this super strong and super stable. So hopefully this apron will last me a really long time. So let me know. What did you think of my apron? Have you wanted to make one for the fall? Please let me know. A big, huge thank you to everyone that has joined the channel, who has liked and subscribed so far. Your response to the last video is absolutely outstanding. If you'd like to continue to support me and what I'm working on, please leave a like down below. And if you haven't subscribed already, I would deeply appreciate it. Obviously, based on the last video, it really does help, and it helps me reach a lot more people. Thank you so much for everyone for watching, and bye guys!